Hello true believers. I believe that the rogue gallery of a superhero plays a very big role in the popularity of the character. And when I look at the popularity of certain superheroes and then at their rogue gallery, I feel vindicated in my belief. Superheroes like Spider-Man, Batman, Superman and the Flash are some of the most popular and beloved superheroes, and they all happen to have absolutely amazing rogue galleries. But it is very hard to create great rogue galleries for a character, which is why we have so little of them. A good rogue gallery has to have a great variety of multidimensional villains, who entail all kinds of different challenges for the hero. One major villain is also never enough. The reader needs to brainstorm about who the greatest enemy of the hero is. I believe that the Sentry 2 has one of those great rogue galleries. Or at the very least his rogue gallery has the potential to add a lot to him and greatly elevate him as a character. Unfortunately, his rogue gallery has been criminally underutilized so far, which is why I want to highlight some of his lesser known opponents. Just keep in mind that many of them are from the Age of the Sentry miniseries, which is not really canon to the regular Marvel universe. But at the same time, we should never say never, since Cranio 2 started off in the Age of the Sentry and made it into canon not too long ago. I will also be ranking Sentry's villains, but before I start throwing out numbers, I want to start off with the first bad guy the Sentry has ever faced, the Blue Buffoon. The Blue Buffoon had robbed a bank and came across the Sentry, who at that point didn't even have his suit yet. Sentry grabbed a mask to disguise himself and defeated the Blue Buffoon. The interesting thing about that encounter was that Bob drew the Blue Buffoon when he was a kid. 9 years old, and Bob was already better at drawing than I'm now. That's feels Batman. Some of Sentry's story was unfortunately handled over character biographers, and this was one of those unfortunate instances. A biography revealed that the Blue Buffoon was the first form the Void had ever taken. We will take a closer look at the Void later on. And now, before we start with the actual ranking of Sentry's rogue gallery, let's get a couple of ugly ass motherfuckers out of the way first, since they sure as shit shouldn't even be in this video. But since I'm trying to be elaborate here, I have to at least mention them. One of those weirdos was Tor, a disgusting green pimple with a beard, who will hopefully stay in the alternate reality and away from the regular Marvel universe until the end of time. Then there was also Junior Hauler, also known as the Mountain Man, a redneck hillbilly, and judging by how his entire family behaved, he has probably settled down and married his cousin. Then there was also the psychopathic crazy person Tommy Vermillion, also known as the Vendor, who killed people and turned them into hot dogs. And that is rather dark, even for Sentry standards. But Vendor is not around anymore anyway, and I don't even know what the fuck this thing is. And now, let us begin with the exploration and ranking of Sentry's actual rogue gallery. 11. At rank 11 we have the Super Collider, a top-notch Soviet physicist who harnessed the secret of atomic power for his own evil ends. He is basically a smarter and more powerful version of the other Russian guy from Marvel, who likes to run into things head first. At one point Super Collider was bullying the Fantastic Four, until the Sentry intervened and overloaded the Super Collider with the power of 1 million exploding suns. 10. At rank 10 we have Xeniac, who is totally not meant to be Calabac. Xeniac is a hulking alien, who wields a high-tech mace, and can create force fields. He is also a member of the Factious Five, which is something like the Sinister Six are for Spider-Man. The exact roster of the Factious Five has unfortunately never been revealed, but that still leaves the door open for introducing a team-up between 5 of Sentry's opponents, in order to bring him down. 9. At rank 9 we have Ursus, a circus bear that has been genetically manipulated by Cranio. And no, Ursus wearing a skirt doesn't mean that you're looking at a gay bear. It means that Ursus is female. Alongside super strength, invulnerability and flight, Ursus has also radioactive I-beams, which are similar to the negative energy of the Void. These I-beams greatly weaken the Sentry and force him to use his brain instead of his brawn to win his fights against Ursus. 8. At rank 8 we have Danny Boy, an Irish brawler, who loves his stupid hat as much as I love the Sentry. But I would not dare say that to his stereotypical leprechaun face, since he seems to be strong and durable enough to compete with the Sentry and the Hulk at the same time. As for now, Danny Boy's not a problem though, since the Golden Guardian of Good and the Green Goliath have defeated Danny Boy and left him in the negative zone. 7. At rank 7 we have Destroyer Dark Mass, who is totally not meant to be Darkseid from the Great Darkness Saga. In the non-canon story The Age of the Sentry, Destroyer Dark Mass was an omnipotent cosmic being who was the ruler of an alternate reality. Destroyer Dark Mass was not happy with his own reality. He was constantly destroying and recreating it to turn it into something else, but the already established physics of that reality were preventing him from achieving his goal. In the Age of the Sentry story, Sentry's power was a sentient force, which escaped out of Destroyer Dark Mass' unstable reality and bonded with the enhanced super soldier serum, which Bob then consumed. I always liked this alternate, yet non-canon take on Sentry's super soldier serum, because it explained why his version of the enhanced serum was so much more powerful than other versions. His version of the serum contained an unexplored cosmic force. We never saw Destroyer Dark Mass again, and that is quite the pity, if you ask me. Destroyer Dark Mass could be this jealous cosmic god who wants to rule over a stable reality. I can imagine a story where he forces his way into the regular Marvel universe and tries to take over, and then Sentry has to team up with absolutely everyone else to stop him. Or someone else from Destroyer Dark Mass reality visits the Sentry and asks him for help. And then Sentry has to go to that highly unstable reality and help the people there fight Destroyer Dark Mass. 6. At rank 6 we have Gorax, who is totally not meant to be Parasite. Let me tell you right now, I absolutely love the aesthetics of Gorax. The real Gorax was an alien with the power to siphon sentience of others and regenerate that way. Cranio fucked Gorax up and separated his brain and body. Sometime later Gorax's brain bonded with living gelatin, which shapeshifts into whatever someone is thinking. If I had that gelatin I would be thinking of naked women. Now Gorax starts off as a brain and a makeshift body, but the more sentience he siphons, the more bones and organs he regenerates. He also seems to grow in power. 5. At rank 5 we have the General, a character who would nowadays probably not be written the way he was written over a decade ago. The General is a Francophobe, which means that he fears and hates France. He hates France, the French, their culture, most likely also their love for baguettes and snails, their accent and their obsession with cheese, the fact that they always surrender and so on. I wonder if he is somehow related to Ultimate Captain America. It would fit, since the General also started off in the military, where he was creating weapons and gadgets, before he became more and more radical and crazy. The General may be crazy, but he is a master engineer with a genius level intellect. He has created many different military themed gadgets, which not only specifically took out various X-Men, but even caused the Sentry himself trouble. The General also has the ability to influence minds, which he uses to manipulate others into fighting for his cause. He was also the one who recruited Mastermind to manipulate the Sentry into pretty much erasing his very own existence. I personally wouldn't be surprised if the General was the leader of the factious 5. 4. At rank 4 we have Scout, who is a rather new, but nonetheless great addition to Sentry's rogue gallery. Scout started off as Sentry's sidekick and accompanied him during some of his adventures. One of these quote-unquote adventures was an encounter with the Void, a battle that would change how things went for Scout forever. During the battle the Void had ripped off Scout's arm, which led to the Sentry erasing the Void and himself from existence. In process Scout had lost his powers and was abandoned by the Sentry, even when the Sentry returned. Over the years Scout was getting more and more bitter about his life. Back in the day he was a superhero, but now he was just an one-armed short order cook. He was jealous of the Sentry and even started hating him. He came up with a plan to obtain Sentry's powers and replace him as the new Sentry. 3. At rank 3 we have Cranio, the mastermind behind a couple of other villains from this list. Cranio started off in the non-canon story The Age of the Sentry, but recently made his jump into the regular Marvel universe in the 3rd Sentry volume. In process Cranio underwent a character rework. In the Age of the Sentry Cranio was a genius, whose only goal was to start a campaign of terror, whatever that is supposed to mean. He was so smart that he was always 3 steps ahead. Figuratively speaking, Cranio was almost never really there. Either Sentry was dealing with robot copies of Cranio or holograms, while the real Cranio was safe and sound somewhere else. The age of the Sentry Cranio might have even been a meta-human or an android, since he had no problems being on a moon, which was emitting radiation strong enough to kill humans. Now in the regular Marvel universe, Cranio has been reinvented a little bit. He appears to be a regular human, but still has genius level intellect. On top of that, Cranio has mental powers, which are further amplified by his helmet. In the past he has been defeated by the Sentry and imprisoned, but let out early for good behavior. And just like Scout, Cranio is unhappy with his current life, which is why he is looking for ways to return to his old glory days as a villain. I have to admit that I think there is quite a bit of wasted potential with this new take on Cranio, but I will talk more about Cranio in a future video. 2. At rank 2 we have the Void, who is the opposite of the Sentry. The Void is Robert Reynolds' dark and twisted persona. He is who Robert secretly is, but does not want to be, while the Sentry is who Bob wants to be, but simply not is. Being a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic does not make it easier for Bob. He suffers from hallucinations and delusions, which tend to manifest in the form of the Void. When Bob imagines a dark, destructive monster coming after him, he subconsciously wills the Void into existence to do just that. Then there are times where Bob talks himself into believing that he is the Void and nothing else. During these instances he abandons the Sentry, fully embraces the call of the Void, and goes on horrifying murder sprees in order to undo all the good the Sentry has done. The Void is so vital and important for the Sentry that we will talk about him much more in depth in a future video. 1. And now, at number 1, the vilest villain of them all. A villain so powerful that his power transcends the Marvel Omniverse, and his villainy can be felt in the real world. Brian Michael Bendis. Bendis was a figuratively and literally big writer for Marvel. And while he started off great and even later on occasionally still came up with great ideas, with time he got more and more lazy and out of touch with his audience. Bendis is known for ignoring continuity, the status quo, and the personality of characters. He will do whatever is necessary to tell his stories, no matter the cost. The Sentry was one of the characters who suffered from his bad writing the most. Bendis had ignored pretty much all of the aspects of the Sentry, which made the character appealing in the first place. Instead he had reduced the Sentry to what his stories at that time needed. And what the stories needed was for Tony Stark and even Norman Osborn, also known as the crazy villain Green Goblin, to have a potent weapon in their wars against everyone else. Bendis had given Stark and Osborn that weapon in form of the Sentry. And that is something you simply can't do. Captain America's shield, Red Hood's guns, and even the Green Lantern rings are also nothing more than weapons. They are no one's favorite characters. They are objects without personalities. And for years, the Sentry was nothing more than a bullet that had been aimed at a threat and fired. Never something more, but too often even less. Now don't get me wrong. I still believe that Bendis is a very talented writer. His early work on Ultimate Spider-Man was one of the reasons why I got into comics in the first place. As I said, Bendis still has great ideas from time to time. And he also had some great ideas for the Sentry in mind. But the problem was that he didn't focus on what actually mattered. For example, Bendis dedicated far more panels to his infamous and ridiculous Bendis speech than showing what was going on with the Sentry, the most complex and conflicted character in his New Avengers, Mighty Avengers and Dark Avengers runs. Bendis put Moonstone on the Dark Avengers team for no other reason than being the team's Ms. Marvel and having sex with the other members, instead of actually showing Sentry's fall into the darkness. Sentry's downfall was explained in biographies instead of the comics. In the biographies we learned that Norman Osborn, who is a great chemist, had lied to the Sentry. He made the Sentry believe that he was giving him his old super soldier serum and making him more stable that way, when in fact Osborn was giving the Sentry drugs, which were destabilizing his psyche and bringing out more of the Void. So Bendis did have a somewhat believable explanation for completely changing the Sentry, but he didn't make sure to actually communicate that with the readers. Instead readers saw a conflicted yet laid back badass in the Sentry turn into a mentally challenged manchild who didn't know if ripping someone's head off was a good or a bad thing. I can't even right now, and neither could many other readers. Fortunately we have Jeff Lemire now, who has done a much better job with his take on the Sentry. I have seen readers who used to dislike the Sentry admit that they are enjoying his current run. And I have to admit that it makes me really happy to see that. I just hope that one day Jeff Lemire or another great writer gets the chance to write the Sentry again and showcases more of how great of a character the Sentry really is. And then we will hopefully also see some of Sentry's great villains return as well. Until then, have a nice day, and as always, stay vigilant.